Welcome to all of you from where you're joining us from around the world, and welcome to today's webinar, Unlocking MNO and OEM Opportunities with the new eSIM IoT Specification. My name is John King. I'm the Commercial Officer here at Kaleido Intelligence, and over the next 45 minutes to an hour, we'll have a series of presentations and also panel discussion for you on this exciting topic. Now, I think for many of you joining us today, you'll know there's a lot of buzz naturally in the industry around the new eSIM IoT specification. Very much, of course, designed to reduce the technical burden for eSIM and in tandem, enable those global deployments further. So really digging into that, looking at how we can harness that opportunity, looking at what that is going to look like for MNOs and OEMs alike, is very much what we're going to be looking at over the next 45 minutes. And we're thrilled that you can be here to join with us today. So in a moment, we are going to run through the agenda for today's webinar for you. But before we get there, as you can see, we have a fantastic list of speakers who are here sharing with us today. So Mikel from IDEMIA, Guillermo from Telefonica Tech, Simon from u-blox, and Stefan also from Kaleido. So, gentlemen, it's fantastic to have you with us today. And for the sake of the audience, I'm going to invite you to come off of mute and give a quick introduction to yourself and your roles within your respective companies. So let us go from left to right as we can see the faces on the screen in front of us. So Mikel, if I start with yourself, and then Guillermo, Simon, Stefan, I'll let you follow on.
Hello, thank you for that, John. Hopefully you can hear me correctly. Yes, okay, so my name is Mikel Svensson. Like mentioned, I'm the VP, Vice President of Digital Business Line for IDEMIA. So what that is, basically we cater for eSIM, consumer, eSIM, M2M, eSIM, IoT, and OTA platforms. Guillermo.
Hi, my name is Guillermo Alberdi. I am Product Manager responsible for Telefonica Tech SIMs and specifically eSIM and remote profile management platforms and their integration with our mobile managed connectivity platform, as well as international partnerships. And for T-Tech, Telefonica Tech is a company providing connectivity solutions for IoT devices, not only in our Telefonica footprint, but worldwide.
Good day, everybody. My name is Simon Glassman. I'm Senior Principal for Strategic Partnerships at u-blox for cellular. So principally, my role is engagement with the mobile operator and connectivity service provider ecosystem in EMEA and Australia, New Zealand. For those that don't know, u-blox is a leading provider of modules and chipsets, as well as services for positioning, cellular, and short-range technologies. Thank you.
Great. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I'm Stefan Sorrell. Essentially, my role is to lead the research into all things IoT, so looking at eSIM in that context, of course, in addition to things like IoT roaming, as well as all the vendor products that go around that. So, like connectivity management platforms, remote SIM provisioning solutions, and so on.
Perfect. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm sure the audience with myself is very much looking forward to your inputs and discussion and presentations over the next 45 minutes or so. So on that note, let us look through and give a quick recap into the agenda that we have for you today. And as mentioned, today's webinar, it's all about focusing on the MNO and OEM opportunities enabled with the new eSIM IoT specification. And as you can see, we're breaking the webinar today into 4 different elements. So firstly, we'll start with a presentation from Kaleido to introduce the new specification and what's for the industry. Now, Kaleido, if you're not familiar, we're a specialized research firm. We literally play in the roaming and cellular IoT connectivity space year round. And of course, eSIM is a huge topic that we're addressing, not just with your classical trend, competitive and data analysis, but also we do a lot of work surveying end users. So what Stefan will present in this first section shows both our outlook for the growth of the eSIM market, but also the perceptions, the attitudes, the challenges faced by enterprises who take part in our annual survey program. So that'll really help, I think, to quantify the direction, the attitudes towards eSIM from end users. And it also very much sets the scene for the second element that we'll move into in the webinar, which of course is the panel discussion, where Mikel, Guillermo, Simon, and Stefan will all come on board, and there will be 4 specific question areas that we're getting their feedback on. Again, that's all then digging deeper into what this new specification actually means when thinking of business opportunity, customer needs, your use cases, and that transition from M2M to IoT as well. So we'll spend a good amount of time in the panel discussion, and then from there, we'll move on to a second presentation from IDEMIA, who, of course, as many of you know, are working with firms across the industry to help them realize the potential of eSIM IoT as well. So Mikel will lead this section, sharing really best practices that they see for MNOs and OEMs alike. And then finally, we'll be finishing up with an audience Q&A. So on a topic such as this, I'm sure many of you already have questions on this topic as you're coming to the webinar, and we certainly want to hear them. For sure, there will be additional questions that you probably have triggered through the presentations and the panel discussion, and we want to hear those as well. So to submit your questions, we would like to be using the chat feature. That should be on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. If you open that up, please just submit all the questions you have as we go over the next 45 minutes, and we have this dedicated time at the end where we will get through as many of them as we can. Okay, so finally, before I hand over to Stefan to lead us through the next section, it's important to highlight as well that everything we're discussing today will be available to you through both the webinar recording, which will probably come early next week, and of course there is a new white paper that we are publishing on this topic as well that will be coming to you shortly. So that will include what we're talking about today, with of course some wider and deeper analysis as a tool that you can use to inform your internal strategies as well. So keep an eye out for that. We will be in communication with you post-event with all the details, but bear in mind that that resource is going to be coming to you. Okay, I think that covers all the foundation work. So let us move into the first presentation. It's my pleasure to hand over to Stefan to lead us in that. So Stefan, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, John. Maybe we move to the next slide. There we go. Yeah, just maybe some quick housekeeping, some basics for those who perhaps aren't aware. I mean, when we talk about eSIM, it's really about the concept of flexibility. So while eSIM itself is a bit of a misnomer, not necessarily embedded, can actually come in any form factor. Really, the vision for eSIM is to enable flexibility in connectivity over a device's life cycle. So rather than having to physically swap out a SIM in a very remote location, spending a lot of money doing so, eSIM provides an infrastructure and a solution to enable over-the-air reconfiguration of a SIM card. So you can, if you want, move from operator A to operator B if there is a particular reason to do so. Now, when we bring that into the context of IoT, in my opinion, that becomes fundamentally important, especially when you consider IoT device life cycles 10 years plus, often more. And really the very foundation for bringing value from IoT is to make sure that you have connectivity, availability, and data flowing through the network back into your systems. So you really need a high level of flexibility to guarantee that, and really that's what eSIM is for. So, since around 2016, we've had an interoperable profile and eSIM solution available on the market via the M2M, so machine-to-machine specification, and that was designed to address the requirements that I have just been talking about. But I think it's interesting to bring it into the context of how eSIM via that specification has grown versus the remainder of IoT. And that's kind of highlighted in the left-hand chart there. I've stripped out China because obviously China has quite a unique market, quite a substantial market, let's say, in narrowband IoT use cases. So yeah, rest of the world there, we can see via the blue bars that IoT connections, cellular IoT connections have grown from 2016 from just over 200 million to approaching 700 million by the back end of last year. But in comparison, actively used, let's say, eSIM connectivity only reached 100 million during the same time frame. To be fair, from a starting point of 0, but you can quite clearly see that the growth has not matched the wider IoT market. Now, when we bring that into context of what are enterprise or end customer requirements, so for example, earlier this year, we conducted quite a large survey covering 800 enterprises, asked them various questions. And one of those was, what are the top 5 factors that's most important when you look at IoT connectivity? And when we look at the responses that respondents included within those top 5 rankings, first of all, 89% of those cited a need to avoid challenges related to commercial or regulatory restrictions. So things to think about there are things like permanent roaming, which is perhaps banned at a regulatory level, or perhaps there are operators who are a bit concerned about such devices and tend to block them. On the other hand, 61% of respondents cited a need for robust international coverage. So that's not necessarily, just a footprint enabled by one operator in a specific country, but having a choice of several particular operators, perhaps, really to be able to optimize that connectivity footprint, optimize performance, optimize price, and so on. These are the kinds of things that eSIM is ideal to address in principle. But when we look at the growth, why hasn't it happened? And so I think it's important, if we now move to the next slide, to understand perhaps what are the things surrounding the existing M2M specification, and why has there been a need for the industry to develop what is coming out soon in the form of the eSIM IoT specification. So if we look at the left-hand chart here, going back again to our survey results that I mentioned earlier. So what are the main issues with the eSIM solution? First of all, 51% of respondents mentioning a lack of available profiles. Meanwhile, 49% mentioning that mobile network operators perhaps only support one type of eSIM profile. And as we'll see in a bit, that is heavily skewed away from the M2M specification. So we can infer from that when it comes to M2M spec eSIMs, perhaps they saw a lack of eSIM profiles there. Then, when we look at respondents who reported that they hadn't used eSIM, we asked them why. And overwhelmingly, so 67% highlighted nicely in red there for you, 67% of those respondents reporting that they have found that it's either simpler or more cost-effective to use, let's say, traditional SIM solutions. So those can come in the form of global roaming SIMs or multi-IMSI SIMs, for example. And really, from that side of the market, we can see that there's been a perception that using those types of solutions is a much less complex endeavor than going the eSIM route, which in theory provides you with that flexibility, but perhaps hasn't managed to address that in the most optimal manner, let's say. So if we move to the next slide, please, John. There we go. So let's have a look a little more deeply. So I'm not going to go into a great level of tech detail here. I'm going to present this from a more high-level, abstract level. But yeah, we can see the comparison here on the left with the M2M spec, and on the right, the IoT specification. So first of all, where the M2M specification is concerned, When we look at the architecture of the underlying solution, certainly when we talk to the wider industry, we note that there has been let's say, a high level of technical barriers involved. So when you look at the different remote SIM provisioning components, these need to be integrated together. The integration itself is quite complex because you're integrating server components, exchanging secret keys, for example, and that is quite difficult to achieve, and can often be time consuming as well. When we look at the overall device space across IoT, obviously there's a lot of vehicles out there. That's been well addressed by eSIM. But also there are a lot of devices out there that are perhaps battery powered, don't have a lot of processing power, don't have a lot of bandwidth. And the M2M specification demanded things like HTTPS, TCP/IP stack, for example. And that is not ideal for devices that are, let's say, power or let's say constrained devices. It's not ideal for those. The third point is, as part of the M2M spec, SMS was mandated, which is not actually supported by all IoT devices, especially when you consider narrowband IoT, which certainly is not addressed on a universal basis by mobile network operators. So actually, your device might be enabled with eSIM, but the remote SIM provisioning architecture may never actually be able to communicate with it. So you're never actually benefiting from that over-the-air reprogrammability. And the last point to make is essentially one of the server components, so the routing component of the M2M specification, had to be configured at the point of production. So essentially what that means is that right at the point of production, someone had to know already at that point who that connectivity service provider was. And that works in some cases, but for the wider industry, there's a lot of uncertainty. So, for example, where is that device going? Who is best able to serve that particular device? So that introduces some potential issues around scale. Now let's move to the IoT spec, where the design changes have been made to lower these technical barriers. So first of all, it's reusing part of the existing consumer specification, which is now quite well adopted and growing rapidly. So in that sense, existing infrastructure can be reused, getting rid of that complex integration between different server components and starting to use standard API interfaces. So in that sense, the control switch, let's say, has been much more or has been much simplified, and in that sense allows you to reconfigure the SIM and its connectivity provider more easily than before. Meanwhile, while the M2M spec was perhaps not so optimal for some of those IoT devices, the spec has now been re-engineered to allow support for all IoT devices. So it's bringing in support, for example, for things like constrained application protocols, so things like MQTT, lightweight M2M, and so on. So on the transport side, much less overheads that might compromise the battery power, for example. Meanwhile, that SMS dependency has been removed. So these narrowband IoT devices can now actually reach the RSP, the remote SIM provisioning infrastructure, because you're using those, say, lower overhead communications protocols to communicate with server components. So those devices are now universally reachable by remote SIM provisioning infrastructure. And another important factor is that where you had to know that connectivity provider at the outset with the M2M spec, that's no longer necessarily the case with the IoT spec. So the different management components within that specification can be reconfigured at any point during the life cycle. So you can point to a new profile infrastructure provider at any point that you want, and thus change your connectivity provider quite flexibly, or configure that connectivity provider quite flexibly in the field if you so wish. So some important changes there. Let's move to the next slide, please, John. System's taking a bit of time today. Okay, so now let's look at what do these changes mean in the context of MNOs and OEMs. So let's deal with the MNOs first of all. So I mentioned earlier that a lot of these enterprises in that survey mentioned a lack of support across the different profile types for eSIM. And when we look at the remote SIM provisioning landscape as of last year, or in fact this year, 70% of those platform instances are directed to consumer eSIM support, which is naturally incompatible with M2M spec support. So this is one reason. But I did mention that actually this existing infrastructure can be repurposed, reused, as well as those existing BSS integrations for eSIM IoT support. What does that mean? It means that operators can now much more easily enter the market to support eSIM IoT use cases. And as an adjacent to that, what we'll see, in my opinion, is that because more MNOs come on board, we'll see more profiles becoming available. So greater choice on the market for customers of those particular profiles. And that's really addressing the highlighted elements of the chart on the right there. So yeah, quite positive in that case. Let's now move to OEMs. We're conscious of time. Next slide, please, John. So on the OEM side, we've seen just now, there's likely to be greater market choice, so more connectivity, more MNOs supplying their profiles into the market, more universal support for IoT use cases. On the technical side, as we've looked at, it's now more simple. On the one hand, you can configure that eSIM-enabled device with a connectivity provider at any point during the life cycle. Don't have to go through those integration pain points. Don't need to know that connectivity service provider from the outset. And because of the way that the switching is easier, you can now optimize that solution. Perhaps it's in a certain country, found a great deal, you want to switch away from your existing provider. It's now more simple to do that. There, of course, are caveats around that, but it's essentially providing much better flexibility than before. And for that reason, when we look at the install base of eSIM and iSIM devices from 2022 to 28, as we see this new IoT specification become introduced, starting from a pre-compliant stage next year and then moving to fully compliant later, we're going to see a lot of traction on the market. So to 2028, we're expecting a 300% increase in eSIM-enabled devices on the market. So yeah, quite a strong growth there, and a lot of that is linked to what's happening on the market there. So really, the point to make really is that it's quite a pivotal moment in the eSIM ecosystem. Just some final points to make. So if we move to the next slide, please, John. So just quickly to run through a couple of things. So first of all, some of you may already have devices out there using the M2M spec. One thing to mention is that there is no migration path from M2M compliance to IoT specification compliance. What that means is that you'll have a potentially disparate way of managing different eSIM estates, which means in turn, you need to consider how the orchestration of those devices is managed from a logic perspective, from a business workflow perspective, from a business rules perspective, you really need to have a solution in place that abstracts that complexity, provides you with a single pane of glass. That's quite essential, especially as the volumes increase. Finally, because what we're expecting to see, growth on eSIM, first on the IoT side of things, but also don't forget the smartphone side and the consumer side of the business is growing a lot. So these systems that support them, they need to scale and they need to have availability. So do your due diligence. Can those systems provide elasticity? Can they provide high reliability and the security, as I mentioned, to provide that high availability for IoT operations? And with that, I'll hand back over to John.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I think that's a really detailed and thorough, I guess, overview of where we are in the market, and especially, those findings are from those enterprises in terms of how they're viewing this. So thank you for sharing, and I think it sets us up very nicely for this second section now, which we'll get straight into. So I'd like to invite Mikhail, Guillermo, and Simon, and yourself, Stefan, just to come off of mute now. And let's go through some of these 4 set questions that we want to go through to dig deeper into this area. And again, for the audience with us, again, use that chat feature on the right-hand side as we go for any questions that you have from Stefan's presentation. So, of course, what we're going to be discussing now over the next 15 minutes or so. Okay, let's get straight into it. So we've seen, and you've shared, Stefan, about why the IoT specification has been developed. Okay, so I guess I'd like to understand, for the first question for our panelists, is can you share an example of how clients will have their needs met by the new specification? How is it going to be better, essentially? So first up, Simon, from the OEM perspective, from u-blox's perspective, I'm very keen to get your thoughts first on this.
Sure. So I think there's 2 or 3 kind of things that come to mind initially. Certainly from our perspective, we're seeing a significant and increasing proportion of IoT devices now using LPWA networks. So networks that are either LTM and also narrowband based, which, as has been said, have constraints, inherent constraints on data rate and power, and they need to be energy efficient and so on. These devices are using these types of networks are often located in remote locations or other challenging, hard to reach environments. One thing about the new specification is that it is designed, specifically to address such network requirements, i.e. those that are kind of bandwidth and UI constrained, which obviously means it's totally fit for purpose. So that's good news. Also having access to a much wider range of locally available connectivity profiles. I think particularly those with some of the power saving features that LPWA devices need to be working optimally. So things like PSM and EDRX, having those activated and available from local profiles will be a distinct advantage. And what we see often is that those kind of features are not always available, for example, through roaming. So that would be one key point. Obviously, the other thing is, solutions based on the new IoT spec will allow for remote switching of profiles without any kind of physical intervention. So, that in turn for customers reduces their operational costs and kind of infill costs in particular, which makes things a lot easier, more convenient for them. I think the final thing I just want to highlight on this question is that generally with regard to the spec, it's good to point out that it is actually SIM form factor independent. And, we see devices that use external SIMs, traditional SIMs, plastic SIMs, shoulderable SIMs, embedded SIMs, which are coming now to the fore, where the SIM functionality is on a secure element inside the module, for example, or iSIMs, which is coming in the future. And as long as the SIM is implemented with the right EU ICC OS, then the standard will become applicable. So in that regard, I think, it's designed to be kind of with future proofing in mind. So that's the last point from me on that question.
That's no, you said that. Thank you for that. And I'm keen then to also get the perspective from an MNO side. So Guillermo, I put that same question to you, and I'm really keen to get your thoughts on this too.
Thank you, John. Yes, for several years we have received requests from customers for eSIM due to several needs that they have related to single SKU in global deployments, to more flexibility, different needs, and we have been solving these needs with for some of these customers with M2M eSIM. But unfortunately, as Stefan was mentioning before, the M2M specification requires very complex and costly integrations. They are lengthy in time as well, and efforts to meet the requirements of some of these customers, some of the requirements at least, and we haven't been able to meet them in some occasion due to this. So what we see from Telefonica, we have the expectation that the new IoT eSIM will simplify the ecosystem by reducing the integrations required, the complexity, and the overall costs, and therefore we think that this new standard will help Telefonica improve its IoT value proposition to be able to satisfy all these customers' requests with it, and we think that it will get to a much larger adoption of the eSIM now with it, that just with the current standard, as we haven't been able to meet all customer needs, only part of them. So we think that basically what it covers, what the functionality and the customer needs are similar to the existing M2M, but the existing M2M did it only for part of the customers. It didn't fit them all, and this will help cover the rest that were not able to be covered up to now.
Thanks, Guillermo. And then finally on this first question, so Mikel, from your perspective, from IDEMIA and the array of companies you're working with, I'm really keen to get your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I think I'm going to expand a little bit of what Guillermo said. I mean, the M2M was so over complex. It was a real octopus. It had arms all over the place, right? And that made it, and you showed the statistics before, only 30% of operators actually deployed it. Okay, so we're missing out. The big advantage from our side and how we see it is that this new spec coming up utilizes most of what is out there already for the normal eSIM consumer. So with some minor adjustments, you can take it to market. This is really going to help it bring to mass market. Operators already have the basic infrastructure there.
Nice. Thank you so much. Let's get straight on to the next question. And for this one, Guillermo and Simon, this is coming to yourselves. Okay, so because I guess if we're thinking specifically from an MNO and an OEM perspective, you know, I'm really keen for you to share with the audience what are the perceived business opportunities, you know, directly that you see being realized as a result of this new specification. So I went to Simon first last time. So Guillermo, I'm going to come to you first this time.
Thank you, John. So as I was saying, we see many customers with several needs related to global deployments with a single SKU, having just one product to be shipped to the whole world, right? And they want to deploy in many markets with this single product, and having to contract with local MNOs is costly for them and complicates their requirements, which is really simple worldwide connectivity. So having multiple MNOs means having multiple platforms to manage their connectivity, in some cases to have local presence legally for contracts with MNOs, or having to deal with many different support levels. And we see from Telefonica an opportunity there. We are currently offering a complete solution with a single pane of glass through Kite, which is our managed connectivity platform. And that provides customers with a single point of contact for their worldwide connectivity and a single billing. Currently, we do this with the M2M eSIM and with roaming, but the new IoT eSIM will help us expand the number of agreements that we can have locally and improve the value of these solutions to our customers. Because currently with the M2M, the adoption has been slow by many MNOs, the number of partnerships and arrangements that we can have with other MNOs is smaller, and we expect to be able to grow it a lot with the new IoT SIM, and we will be better suited to go for these opportunities.
Perfect. Thanks, Guillermo. And then Simon, I guess, yeah, same question to you, and then from that OEM perspective.
Yeah, I think some of the the opportunities we're seeing are similar to those mentioned already by Guillermo. But first and foremost, the new standard will just make it easier to access local profiles in a simpler, more cost-effective way, and having that ability to connect to new providers, different providers, kind of on the fly almost at some point in the life cycle of the device will be an advantage. So that whole connectivity provisioning and switching becomes a lot more straightforward. Again, as mentioned, we think this is critical, particularly at our part of the food chain, if you like, where having a single device SKU makes things a lot easier. And both from the module vendor side and I think IoT device manufacturing side, that is a distinct advantage. So having single device SKU rollouts can really simplify the manufacturing, supply chain, and inventory management side of things. Also, I think with the new standard, we'll have this flexible provisioning and management capabilities, and that will just make things easier for everybody in the value chain. And that's particularly the case, as is often the case in IoT, where you may be selling not B2B, but B2B to B, which means the original manufacturer of, say, a module or device don't always know where those devices will ultimately be deployed by the end customer in the chain. So having that ability to select and to provision and switch profiles according to whatever business criteria or other requirements there are at the most appropriate time in the life cycle of a deployed device will be a real advantage. So we're certainly seeing that as a positive, as a benefit.
Thank you for that. Okay, lovely. Let's move it on then to the next question. So here's an interesting one then to go through. So Stefan shared briefly, right, about the connectivity requirements from different industry verticals. So we have that viewpoint from the work that Kaleido does, but from your perspectives, can you share a bit more with the audience about just the verticals you see being enabled by the new specification, and also why, with the rationale behind that? So Simon, why don't I bring you straight back in, if you don't mind, to come on this one?
Sure. We certainly see a range of different opportunities opening and being addressed in the market with the new spec and the standards and solutions based on the spec. For example, for both, you can look at both moving and stationary types of assets. Obviously, IoT devices can be in applications or use cases that are to do with things that are stationary or things that are moving. I think for moving assets, for both global deployments and for those kind of assets that are moving across geographical boundaries, again, having that flexibility to be able to readily select local profiles in different markets will be obviously an advantage. In sectors like transportation and asset tracking solutions, things like container tracking, cold chain, and so on. Another example is in metering, particularly smart metering, electricity, gas, and so on. I think as was mentioned earlier in the slides with regard to narrowband IoT, whether those devices are either static or mobile, those types of devices, metering devices, can expect to see some kind of changes in the network availability or even competition for connectivity supply over their typical 10+ year lifetime in the field, because typically those kind of meters are deployed for a long time. And what that means is I think that a permanent tie to a single MNO or connectivity provider network could actually be limiting in for those kind of devices and those deployments. And things like the liability, or sorry, the they could be liable to future increases in connectivity costs, as another example. So, you know, the new standard helps to kind of address some of those kind of longevity issues, if you like. And as mentioned again, I mean, the new standard again removes that requirement for SMS, which in the M2M SPIC is required as a triggering mechanism within M2M RSP. You know, that goes away. You know, so the IoT RSP specification will be much more viable for devices using NB-IoT connectivity. I think another sector we see, and particularly growing one, is in healthcare and telehealth and so on. Particularly where data privacy is often critical. You know, it's very important to maintain that the privacy of data in healthcare applications. And where regulations may determine that data needs to stay, you know, in country or within a given market, or even to use local providers. So having that ability, again, to use local connectivity partners and local agreements contractually for healthcare and well-being type devices will certainly be a benefit, I think.
I mean, we see that in the same verticals, and like you mentioned, there's those areas such as regulation which play a huge part in that as well. So no, thank you for that. And Guillermo, let's go straight to your end as well from what you see. I don't know if you echo that, if there's other feedback that you want to add to that as well.
Okay, thank you, John. Yeah, building up a little bit on what I was saying in the previous question, I do share some of the verticals that Simon said, but we see a clear common driver for many verticals, which is providing a solution to the permanent roaming restrictions. As you're saying, regulation plays a large role in many cases, and permanent roaming restrictions and regulations is very critical to large multinationals who want to maintain a single SKU for production and logistics. The automotive industry being the most clear vertical in this case, and Simon said utilities, metering, but in those cases they want to simplify or keep their logistics as simple as possible. And knowing local regulations and permanent roaming restrictions is difficult for these customers, and relying, it's not possible to just rely on solutions based on roaming. So these customers need to be able to download local profile where needed while maintaining this homogeneity, just single link SKU. So we really see that in a sector with multinational players deploying worldwide will be very interested in the IoT SIM for this reason. The automotive industry is a case that is very singular, and they have already gone very deep with the M2M eSIM and will continue to do so in a large part. But other fixed assets such as metering, street lighting, healthcare applications, and will be very interested. I think we will see a large adoption of the IoT SIM with these verticals and multinational players in any other verticals that share these same characteristics.
100%. And there's, like you say, there's so many elements underneath this to consider. Like you mentioned, the IoT roaming. We could spend probably a whole couple hours talking about the IoT roaming side. It's a place that we look into a lot because you have to navigate that. But of course, in the essence of time, you know, we'll move on, and let's move on to the final question. We've touched already about, you know, end-to-end, and of course there are a lot of end-to-end devices already out there. So as we take those devices with us with the new IoT specification, I think the final question is, you know, what do you think are the key elements that are needed for a successful transition? I imagine that's high on, you know, lots of people's priorities and roadmaps and questions when looking at this topic. So, Guillermo, if you don't mind, I'm going to bring you straight back in, you know, to get your view on this point as well.
Yes, of course, John. In Telefonica, we already have some experience with this kind of transition because Telefonica had some customers needing this kind of solution for single SKU, mainly to Brazil due to the roaming regulation, and we implemented a pre-standard eSIM before the M2M standard was available. And as soon as the M2M standard was available, Telefonica integrated our managed connectivity platform Kite with the IDEMIA subscription management platform, and with that we included the M2M eSIM in our products and value proposition to our customer. And having Kite as our in-house developed managed connectivity platform, what allows us is to offer our customers a transparent solution, abstracting them from the technical solution beneath, right? So Telefonica intends to integrate the new IoT eSIM and SNDV Plus with Kite to allow the customers to adopt the new IoT eSIM as seamlessly as possible. So we're currently working within a POC with IDEMIA to be ready when the new IoT eSIM and SNDV Plus are available, so that we can offer them a single pane of glass, right? Obviously, as Stefan said at the beginning, the current M2M eSIMs will not be able to download the new IoT eSIM profiles, but our customers will be able to have both types of eSIMs, and manage the remote profiles through Kite in a single pane of glass, as Kite will use its integrations with the M2M subscription manager or the IoT SNDP Plus to manage the remote provisioning of the profiles and make it transparent to the customers. So we think that this is something that could be very helpful in this situation, in this transition.
Thank you for that, Guillermo. Yeah, I think very valid points there. So no, thank you so much. And Simon, let's bring you back in now, I guess, just to give your thoughts on this transition from u-blox's perspective.
I'm off mood. So I think there's at least 2 or 3 elements I think as is important here. Firstly, standardization is key, and having an industry standardized RSP option for these UI network constrained devices in particular, I think will enable that scalability, growth, increase in IoT adoption. Again, as has been mentioned, that there are already numerous proprietary approaches based on, in particular, multi-IMSI for doing kind of profile switching and so on. But introducing this kind of more common interoperable approach will, I think, certainly make it easier for customers going forward. I think secondly, as part of this transition, removing the kind of technical integration barriers. Many of those are alleviated with the new specification over the kind of inherent complexity of the M2M spec, and of course that passing on that hopefully reduction in cost and increased simplicity towards the customer. And again, in that sort of B2B to B sales scenario I mentioned earlier, we see, for example, it could be a year, even to 2 years before an end IoT device or application actually needs connectivity to be activated, say from the point of initial module manufacture. So having that ability to essentially wait until the connectivity is actually needed to be activated, but still have it provisioned, is advantageous. So that avoids things potentially like having dormant IMSIs sitting on HLRs, which are a cost for somebody in the value chain. Not having that issue is a benefit. I think those kind of aspects need to be taken into account in the new kind of commercial models that come to market as part of this transition, and there should be new opportunities with new commercial models, because you're also introducing new elements into the process, like the EIN, which in itself maybe gives opportunities for new types of player to enter the market. And I think the third thing is just around ensuring interoperability. And what I mean by that is interoperability between the different parts of the IoT infrastructure that are supporting the new standard, the platforms, the elements that have been discussed already, things like SMD pluses and so on, and EIMs and IPAs and all the other acronyms, and also importantly, I think the EU ICC operating systems, the OSs from the different vendors that are actually implemented in the devices, because they will ultimately at some point need to be, working with each other, because customers may have devices that have SIMs inside that are supporting OSs from different vendors at some point. And that's really, I think, necessary or fundamental to facilitating adoption and to avoid fragmentation in the market.
Thank you for that. And Mikhail, let's come to yourself finally on this point, from what you see, obviously from IDEMIA's perspective. I think that's very important to hear as well, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, basically echo what has been mentioned by Simon and Guillermo on this one, right? We clearly identify a transition period here. So we need to be able to make an integration or manage the different use cases as simply, as smoothly as possible. I think I'll go a little bit more into detail in a short while on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, let's move on then to that next session. And I'm aware of the time elements here, so please, I will say, do stay with us, because there's, I think, lots still that we want to share with you, both from what Mikhail's about to share, and then also we've had some great questions coming in as well. So we want to spend some time to look at those later as well. But to start with, Mikhail, let's bring you back in. And again, we've said that we want to talk a bit about those best practices, you know, and what should be looking at. So let me hand over to yourself to take us through that.
All right. So let me just steal a couple of seconds. I know time constraint is there, so I'll go quick just to give you a little bit of introduction on IDEMIA. I think in the telecom industry, it's pretty known. Why is it so known? Well, you can see there we're reaching or getting close to the 1 billion physical SIM cards being sold every year. So that's 1 billion connections, secure connections on a yearly basis that we provide. We have over 200 eSIM platforms across the world. We are champions in the automotive connectivity. Okay, so one thing is to actually connect the devices, but then we also have to do the life cycle management of that. And for that, we also have an OTA platform with around 100 deployments worldwide. And the list goes on, but in the sake of time, we can skip over to the next slide. So I would, if you allow me, take the luxury to recommend 4 main best practices for the eSIM deployments, right? And I'm going to start off with the first one, which is a carry on from the last question that was done. We have this M2M device, and we've learned here that, of course, both are not going to merge. Okay, so the eSIM IoT and the M2M are not going to merge. They're going to be separate technologies. M2M spec came into effect or was adopted almost a decade ago. All right, so you see quite many customers with it. This, on top of that, as mentioned here, most of these devices are made to last. Okay, we can think about electrical meters. We can think about the automotive industry. Actually, your car, if you buy a car actually today, that will come with an M2M. If you buy a car in around a year's time, it probably will also come to an M2M. With the M2M specification, right? So there has to be a transition, and these things are going to be in the market 8, 10, 12 years easily. So you need to be able to take care of this. Ballpark figure of what's connected just now with the M2M, around 150 million. Now we take the eSIM IoT. There's a lot of different researches on this. Some even predict up to 2 billion connected devices in 3 years. That is a huge number. So you need to be able to take care of both. Now, what you cannot have is, I use this UI, I use this UI, I use this API, I use this process, and so on. You need a single point of integration. And this is basically what IDEMIA is here to offer, right? We have a single orchestration layer that allows that seamless deploying, basically. And just summarizing it, single system to manage, monitor, and control all the IoT devices. Single system to manage 2 technologies. That was the first best practice case. I'll go on to the next one. Okay, the second one is, well, we have to prioritize connectivity workflows. Okay, so what does this mean? Basically, I would like you to picture out of one of many industries, transportation of goods, containers, right? For example, here, well, you have different cases. You will have them all around the globe. We were talking a little bit about roaming before. Well, let me deep dive a little bit into it. In some cases, you have nothing to do. For example, if you're traveling or your container is traveling from Denmark to Spain, for example, well, you have the EU regulations. You'll let it pass country by country, not an issue. But as soon as it gets to a third country, this was what Simon was mentioning a little bit. Okay, Well, here we might want to change the connectivity. Then in other cases, Guillermo mentioned Brazil. Perfect. Do you have severe roaming limitations? Okay. It's not if you want to, you have to. Okay. This is as easy as that. And then finally, you have the commercial aspect. If you're good at this, you could get a new commercial roaming agreement every 6 months. Now you need to update everything. How are you going to update all this? Well, you have, remember all this, all these containers across the world in different countries. You can't do this through a UI. This is not practical. It's not efficient. It's impossible. And you're going to stress the hell out of the guy who's managing the system. Okay. So you want this to be automatized. So you need a system that can react on a device location change and a system that allows for different APIs to connect to it. And once you reach that new commercial deal, that you can launch mass campaigns to all the customers. So this takes me to the third best practice. And on this one, I would like to just have you think for a second how many devices there are out there. Yeah, how many IoT devices? This is not the consumer world where you have 2-3 dozen of serious players. Here you have everything, right? You have modems, you have cars, you're going to have everything, even to smart labels. Not only that, then after that, you will have different manufacturers of each. So it's going to be a very diverse ecosystem. Okay. So what we are here to propose is in this ecosystem, you will need to manage the profiles. Okay. It's not the same thing managing a profile of a traffic light as of a container, as of a car in a different country. Okay. So in an unideal world, you would need to have different SKUs where we were talking about different profiles for each one and single one of them. Well, at IDEMIA here, we come with this just-in-time profile generation idea. Okay, we've pioneered the market in this. Basically, you don't need to generate the profile until the last second. You make that decision in the last second. Okay, so you can skewer that profile to that need at that given time. That reduces your costs tremendously. Not only that, the platform has its intelligence inbuilt, which allows you to, for example, the platform will know if it's a 4G or 5G device and automatically send the right update immediately. Just because we're running out of time, I will do the last best practice, if I may. This is one that's going to go quick, I promise. You need the system to be live at all times, right? Again, just imagine if your system falls down, or just imagine you have a security break. We acknowledged this from the start, and we actually took cloud eSIM IoT with Microsoft to the mass market. We have a partnership. A partnership is important to highlight. It's not the same thing as a reseller. Okay, we are partnering with Microsoft to provide that security, resilience, and overall also that capacity to scale according to your needs. So those were my 4 best practices. John, really quickly, but there they go.
Mikhail, that's amazing. Thank you so much. Really clear and concise, and I think helpful in say why those practices are fundamental, you know, when you look at what you're going to need to enable. So thank you so much for that. Let's spend a bit of time before we close. I know we've gone a little bit over the time. Let's spend a bit of time looking at a couple of these questions as well before we close, because we've had some fantastic questions coming in from the audience. If we don't get a chance to get to yours now, we will follow up with you after the webinar. Don't worry about it. But let's get straight into it for the next few minutes. Guillermo, this first question is going to come to yourself if you'd like to take yourself off mute. And it was raised by Francisco, who asks, what role do you expect the MNOs will play to provide the end-to-end solution, meaning the SIMs, eSIM, for instance, as well as the profiles?
Thank you, John. So yeah, going for that, in Telefonica, we see offering the customers the eSIM itself and Kaleido as a managed connectivity platform with acting as the swap orchestrator, having an eSIM integrated with it as well. So this will allow our customers to manage their profiles remotely, easily for full end-to-end solution worldwide, have automatic business rules, and as was as I was saying, we have automatic business rules and an API interface to make it simple and scalable. So we also think that that's the overall solution we think we can offer. And also a more simple version would be to offer customers the capability to just download the Telefonica profile when they have their own management and manage the connectivity through Kite just for the Telefonica connectivity.
Perfect. Thanks, Guillermo. We're going to jump straight to the next one. Stefan, this question's coming to yourself. It was raised by Jesper. Jesper raises, and this I imagine will be similar for lots of people. He said in SPG 22, the power consumed by changing profile is so high that, for example, for water meters with 10 to 15 years lifespan expectation, it's not possible to change the operator without crippling the device lifetime. So will this be better in SPG 32?
Yeah, I can perhaps introduce this one. Maybe the panelists have some additional info, but I think it's important to look at it in this way. When you have the SGP 32 spec, you have two different ways of downloading a profile. First of all is the direct profile download, where the DP Plus communicates directly with the IPA on device using HTTPS. That's ideal for things like automotive use cases, perhaps, devices that are not constrained by power. What you also have is an indirect profile download mechanism, which is where the EIM comes into play. So the IPA will communicate with the EIM via a lightweight transport protocol to save power. And then the EIM, which is a distinct interface, will retrieve the profile from the DP Plus and pass it to the IPA. So that's one way of saving power, in that it is not an end-to-end, for example, HTTPS connection, doesn't have the overheads imposed on a constrained device. Another important thing to mention is that in April this year, the TCAs, the Trusted Connectivity Alliance, have introduced what's known as the IoT minimal profile, which essentially reduces the existing eSIM profile down. I believe it's by approximately 400 bytes, but it's, what that means is that there's actually less data to download for constrained devices. So you have, on the one hand, a lower power requirement for actually downloading that profile, and a smaller profile itself, if required, to help save on that battery life.
Thank you, Stefan. Stefan, stay with me for 1 second, because I think we'll do one more question and then we'll have to bring it to a close. And Frank has asked 2 questions. It's only fair that he gets one of them, Ed. So, Stefan, he says eSIM IoT OS hasn't been certified yet. How does that map out in terms of early eSIM IoT RSP solutions that we're beginning to see now?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of timelines, this is probably best for perhaps Mikkel to address. But from my perspective, I think what we'll see is we'll have early deployments starting from next year, I believe. What will happen is that actually they'll be using OS from SGP.22, so the consumer eSIM, along with the infrastructure that's provided by SGP32. There's still a certification process for OS, as well as a test spec that needs to be completed by the GSMA. I believe the test spec is due to be published towards the end of this year. Perhaps our panelists will correct me on that one. But yeah, there is a certain path until we reach a fully compliant solution. So in terms of .32 OS, as well as .32 infrastructure, I believe that will happen towards the end of either 2024 or beginning of 2025. I'll leave the other panelists to correct me there.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump before the rest on this question. So I think your timelines are right. Okay, Stefan, this is correct. We have what we call a pre-standard. I mean, we can't, nobody can claim just now that we have a standardized solution. Obviously, it's not there. So that is impossible. But we have a pretty good idea where this is going, right? A lot of our members are, for example, in the standardization committee and so on. So we know where this is going. We know already the standards that have been pushed out. We have a pretty good idea. Of course, we're going to stick a lot with the consumer eSIM IoT. Sorry, consumer eSIM consumer market. That is going to be the basis of it all. But going back to the original thing, yes, there is pre-standards, and the idea is to have this pre-standard out in the market, and when the final standard come out, well, then adapt to it. There is not going to be much of a difference between one and the other.
Stefan, Mikhail, thank you both for those. I know we've gone a few minutes over the hour, so for those of you who have stayed with us, which is most of you, to be honest, thank you so much for that. For those we didn't get to, I know that's Olivia, who asked 2 questions as well. We'll come back to you. Edwin, John, Marcus, Massi, Liliana, Jenny. I mean, there's a few of you who have asked questions, and we really appreciate that. And we will certainly be following up with you afterwards. I think on a topic such as this, you know, it's all about information sharing and enabling us all to move forwards together. So rest assured, we will come back to you on that. And of course, for everyone else who's joined us today, who hasn't even asked a question but enjoyed the presentation and panel, remember the recording and the white paper, both linked to this, will be coming your way in the coming days. So stay tuned. We'll send you, all of you, an email to follow up on that later on. If you have any outstanding questions from that as well, or things that come to you afterwards, please don't hesitate to flag them. And I'm sure one of ourselves or the team at IDEMIA, Telefonica, or u-blox will be happy to give you inputs. Okay, but for now, we'll draw it to a close. So thank you so much for joining us today. Mikhail, Guillermo, Simon, and Stefan, thank you so much for all you've shared as well. I know we could keep talking about this, I think, for a while, but really appreciate all you've been able to share today in this time.
Thank you, Ian.